Jaws left the world breathless with terror from the deep, setting the gold standard for horror cinema for decades to come. But behind the film's glory lies heartbreaking tragedy, talented stars lost to devastating accidents and twists of fate no one could have predicted. Let's dive into the untold stories of the legendary cast of Jaws and honor the legacy they left behind. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's go. Roy Scheider as Chief Martin Brody. Roy Richard Scheider was born on November 10, 1932, in New Jersey. In 1975, when he was 43 years old, he left an indelible mark playing Chief Martin Brody in the legendary film Jaws, helping turn it into a symbol of modern horror. The role made him a familiar face worldwide and turned the line, "You're gonna need a bigger boat," into a pop culture staple. But when the camera lights faded, Scheider's life was filled with inner conflict. Once an amateur boxer who used sports to overcome body image struggles, Scheider eventually found success. But that success, especially from Jaws, became a shadow. He was often typecast as the stoic, tough leading man. His career repeatedly wavered due to roles dictated by studio contracts and box office pressures, most notably his reluctant return as Brody in Jaws 2, essentially to repay the studio. On set, especially during Sequest DSV, his backstage clashes revealed a strong-willed artist trapped between creative ideals and commercial reality. His personal life was no less turbulent. His first marriage to Cynthia Bibau lasted nearly a quarter of a century before ending in quiet heartbreak. They had one daughter, Maximilia, who later died of cancer at age 43, just 2 years before Scheider himself was diagnosed with multiple myeloma. The loss of his daughter devastated him. In 1989, he remarried actress Brenda Seymour, had a son, and adopted a daughter. But just as new joy entered his life, illness began to erode both body and spirit. In 2004, Scheider was officially diagnosed with multiple myeloma, a rare and dangerous cancer of the bone marrow. Despite undergoing a bone marrow transplant in 2005, his condition never improved. His final months were marked by pain, medication, and unfinished roles. He passed away on February 10, 2008 in Arkansas from a staphylococcal infection at the age of 75. At the time of his death, Roy Scheider left behind a vast film legacy and an estate worth around $15 million, not an enormous sum for such a cinematic icon. Murray Hamilton as Mayor Larry Vaughn. Murray Hamilton was born on March 24, 1923 in Washington, North Carolina. When he was 52 years old, he made a lasting impression as Mayor Larry Vaughn in Jaws, 1975, the stubborn, cold-hearted head of Amity Island who prioritized profit over human life. Hamilton brought a sharp edge and chilling realism to the character, making him one of cinema's most unforgettable antagonists. In reality, Hamilton's life was full of fractures and sorrow. He had once dreamed of wearing a World War II military uniform, but poor hearing ended that dream early. Undeterred, he moved to New York alone at 19, starting a grueling journey through stage and television. Though clearly talented, Hamilton was quickly typecast into cold, stoic supporting roles and often complained about being creatively trapped by producers. In his private life, Hamilton went through 2 marriages, neither of which brought lasting peace. His first wife, singer Terry DeMarco of the DeMarco Sisters, passed away in the early 1970s, leaving him in prolonged grief. This emotional blow caused him to withdraw from public appearances and immerse himself in work as an emotional escape. Though he had a son, David, who achieved some fame, Hamilton's family life remained largely under the radar. In his later years, he struggled to land roles, especially as health issues began to surface. In 1986, Hamilton was diagnosed with lung cancer, the result of years of smoking. As his health declined, longtime friend George C. Scott, helped secure him a final role in The Last Days of Patton. Nonetheless, Hamilton died soon after, on September 1st, 1986, in his North Carolina hometown at the age of 63. He was buried at Oakdale Cemetery, leaving behind a career rich in substance. Fritzi Jane Courtney as Mrs. Taft. Fritzi Jane Courtney was born on February 15, 1923 in Harlem and raised in Brooklyn. In 1975, when she was 52 years old, she played Mrs. Taft, the kind-hearted innkeeper of Amity Island, a small but steady role that appeared throughout Jaws, Jaws 2, and Jaws: The Revenge. Her character offered a grounded, everyday connection between the locals and the shark-induced nightmare, a peaceful touch amid chaos. Away from the spotlight, however, Fritzi's real life was filled with quiet trials. Long before her work in film, she had already broken barriers by becoming the first female television theater critic in New England, an extraordinary accomplishment in a time when such positions were almost exclusively held by men. But while her professional path showed courage and independence, her personal life was marked by hardship and heartbreak. During World War II, she fell in love with and married Robert Cohen. At first, their union seemed full of hope, but it would later turn into a long and painful chapter in her life. Robert suffered from severe alcoholism, a struggle that gradually tore their marriage apart. Despite her efforts to hold the family together for the sake of their child, Fritzi eventually had to make the difficult decision to leave. She became a single mother, raising her daughter, Jill S. Cohen, under financially strained circumstances, doing whatever she could to provide love, security, and strength, even in the most uncertain times. In the later years of her life, Fritzi battled ongoing health issues, particularly related to her heart. Though she had largely stepped away from public life, she remained a symbol of quiet perseverance and dignity. She passed away peacefully on August 7, 2012, at her home in Portland, Maine. She was 89 years old. Her legacy, like her screen presence, was subtle but meaningful, a reminder that even the smallest roles, both in movies and in life, can leave a lasting impact. Robert Shaw as Quint. Robert Shaw was born on August 9, 1927, in Lancashire, England, and etched himself into the memory of audiences worldwide when he was 48 years old, playing the haunted, hardened shark hunter Quint in Jaws, 1975. With his chiseled face, gravelly voice, and piercing eyes, Shaw transformed Quint into a cinematic icon, especially through his chilling monologue about the sinking of the USS Indianapolis. The role not only marked the peak of his career, but also reflected the intensity and turmoil that existed within him in real life. Much like Quint was haunted by wartime trauma, Shaw carried his own ghosts from childhood. At just 12 years old, he witnessed the suicide of his father, a former lieutenant, which left an emotional scar he never fully healed from. As he grew older, Shaw immersed himself in the arts as an escape, but he also fell deeply into alcoholism. The very years that saw him triumph on screen were also marked by the disintegration of his private life. He went through 3 marriages, including a turbulent one with actress Mary Ure, all scarred by alcohol, infidelity, and tragedy. Mary died of an overdose just 3 years after their divorce, sending Shaw further into inner chaos. In his final years, Shaw often appeared exhausted and disillusioned on film sets. He once confessed that filming Force 10 from Navarone left him feeling like he had nothing more to say. That reflection turned out to be a grim omen. On August 28, 1978, just 3 weeks after his 51st birthday, Shaw suffered a heart attack while driving with his wife and son in Ireland. He managed to step out of the car before collapsing by the roadside, losing consciousness in his family's arms. At the time of his death, Shaw left behind an estate estimated at $5 million, a modest sum for a man with such a vast career, much of which had been used to settle debts and taxes. Susan Backlinie as Chrissy. Susan Jane Backlinie was born on September 1, 1946 in Miami, and became the face of terror for millions when she was 29 years old, portraying Chrissy Watkins, the first victim of the great white shark in Jaws, 1975. She didn't just act. She performed one of the most iconic and dangerous stunts in cinematic history, being yanked back and forth underwater by two teams of men hidden on shore, while her harrowing screams, recorded separately in a studio, were so real that even co-star Richard Dreyfuss admitted, "It genuinely frightened me." But after that unforgettable role, Susan's life didn't follow a Hollywood fairy tale. Her instant fame was narrow, specific, and ultimately limiting. She quickly became typecast as the girl who died from the shark. Rather than opening doors, the role boxed her in. Her acting career, though launched with a bang, never truly took flight. Aside from a few minor parts and a self-parody cameo in Spielberg's infamous flop 1941, the opportunities dwindled. The industry moved on, and Susan, once at the center of its storm, was left behind. Faced with the reality of a stalled career, she quietly transitioned into a new life, one far from cameras and red carpets. Susan retrained and became a computer accountant, choosing stability over spotlight. She embraced a simpler existence, living away from public view. But the challenges didn't stop there. Her personal life was marked by deep emotional strain. Susan endured 2 marriages, both of which ended in divorce. The first left lasting wounds, both financial and emotional, that never fully healed. As a single mother, she worked hard to raise her child on a modest income, living in a small California home and counting every dollar. Occasionally, she would re-emerge to attend fan conventions like Jaws Fest, but those brief flickers of recognition couldn't replace the feeling of being forgotten by the very industry that once placed her in its opening scene. Over the years, the weight of that disconnection took its toll. Susan experienced long periods of depression, silent battles with insomnia, and the gnawing pressure of financial uncertainty. Though remembered by fans for a single terrifying moment on screen, her reality was one of quiet endurance, resilience, and solitude. On May 11th, 2024, Susan Backlinie passed away from a heart attack at her home in Ventura, California. She was 77 years old. Her death, like much of her life after Jaws, was quiet, far from headlines, far from Hollywood's glare. Lee Fierro as Mrs. Kintner. Elizabeth Lee Fierro was born on February 13, 1929, in New York. When she was 46 years old, she took on the brief yet powerful role of Mrs. Kintner, the grieving mother who slaps Chief Brody, in Jaws, 1975. Though not a Hollywood star, she was a drama teacher on Martha's Vineyard, and her slap, repeated 17 times, became one of the most haunting and authentic moments in film history. Behind the screen, Lee Fierro's life was one of quiet sacrifice. She married early and had 4 children with her first husband, actor Marvin Stevens. The marriage eventually ended in stress and financial uncertainty, leaving her to raise their children alone. Later, she married Bernard Fierro and had another child, but her choice to remain on Martha's Vineyard meant stepping away from an acting career to focus on teaching. Fierro dedicated her life to the arts in the most unglamorous but impactful way. She served as artistic director of the Island Theater Workshop for over 40 years, mentoring more than 1,000 students, many of whom went on to become professional actors. Yet these contributions brought her neither wealth nor widespread fame. She managed her finances carefully and received delayed recognition with a Woman of the Year award in 2013. During the early months of the COVID-19 pandemic, Lee Fierro passed away from complications related to the virus on April 5, 2020, at a nursing facility in Aurora, Ohio. She was 91 years old. It was a quiet end to a life devoted to others, to art, and to the belief that even a small role can touch the hearts of millions. Peter Benchley as interviewer. Peter Bradford Benchley was born on May 8, 1940, and gave birth to Jaws, the explosive 1974 novel and its 1975 film adaptation that ushered in the era of the summer blockbuster. When he was 35 years old, Benchley not only wrote the book, but also appeared in the film as a beachside reporter, a subtle reminder that he was the storyteller, observing from the outside, but bearing deep responsibility for the fear that followed. Jaws brought Benchley instant fame, wealth, and a permanent place in pop culture history. But that spotlight came with a psychological burden few could carry. In later years, he publicly expressed deep regret for fueling irrational fear of sharks. Through works like Shark Trouble and his transformation into an ocean conservationist, Benchley not only revised his perspective, but actively challenged the very myth he had created. His personal life was not without struggle. After years as a reporter, editor, and even a speechwriter for President Lyndon B. Johnson, Benchley admitted that the unexpected success of Jaws made it difficult to balance personal life with public expectation. Though he had a long marriage with his wife Wendy and 3 children, he was often torn between creativity and social responsibility, leading him to gradually withdraw from entertainment projects and focus on environmental advocacy. Benchley passed away on February 11, 2006, at his home in Princeton, New Jersey, after battling pulmonary fibrosis. He was 65 years old. At the time of his death, his estate was estimated at around $10 million, largely from book royalties, film rights, and TV deals. Belle Macdonald as Mrs. Posner. Belle Macdonald, born Belle Gerhardt on April 6, 1926, was a little-known actress who appeared in Jaws, 1975, as Mrs. Posner when she was 49 years old. Though her role in the film was fleeting, her real life was a long journey marked by loss and sacrifice over nearly a century. Belle's married life was a symphony of clashing notes. Her first 2 marriages ended in bitter collapse due to infidelity and financial crises. Despite her efforts to hold her family together, she eventually chose to walk away, carrying quiet disappointment and loneliness. Her 3rd marriage, to Belle Macdonald, the only partner who stayed with her until the end, seemed to be the final refuge for a heart worn down by pain. Her greatest heartbreak came with the death of one of her children from a rare illness. That trauma plunged her into a long period of silence and grief, during which she once said in a small interview, "Silence is the only way not to be crushed." Though she continued in the arts with small roles in Night School, Mr. North, and House Sitter, the spotlight no longer had the warmth to restore her broken faith. After Jaws, Belle's career noticeably stalled. Age and personal pain made her retreat from pursuing new opportunities, choosing a life of quiet withdrawal. Her acting roles became rare, and her days passed in solitude and financial modesty. At the end of her life, Belle's net worth was estimated at only $300,000, most of it accumulated with her husband. On November 20th, 2015, Belle Macdonald passed away at the age of 89, leaving this world as she lived, quietly and with quiet resilience. Chris Rebello as Michael Brody. Chris Rebello was born on August 8, 1963, in Oak Bluffs, Massachusetts. When he was 12 years old, Chris caught attention playing Michael Brody, the son of Chief Brody, in the blockbuster Jaws, 1975. His bright face, innocent smile, and natural hesitance in front of the camera left a strong impression. Many believed the young boy was destined to become Hollywood's next child star. But when the summer ended and the cameras stopped rolling, so did Chris's brief journey through show business. There were no more auditions, no follow-up roles, no high-powered agents or industry offers. Rather than pursue a career in acting, Chris quietly returned to the island where he grew up. As the years went on, the bright lights of Hollywood became nothing more than a distant memory, replaced by the everyday struggles of adulthood. In his later years, Chris wrestled with personal demons. He faced battles with substance abuse, struggles that took a toll on both his financial stability and his relationships at home. Yet despite those dark periods, he found a renewed sense of purpose not on a film set, but on the sidelines of a soccer field. Tragically, life gave him far too little time. On November 30th, 2000, while on a deer hunting trip with his childhood friends, Chris died suddenly of a heart attack. He was only 37 years old. The news sent shockwaves through the island community. Just days later, the very team he had devoted himself to, his team, played in the state championship. But they did so without their coach, without their dad, and without the quiet, steady presence that had stood on the sidelines all season long. Joseph Mascolo as Len Peterson. Joseph Peter Mascolo was born on March 13, 1929, and was a gifted performer who appeared in Jaws 2, 1978, as Len Peterson, a cold, pragmatic businessman and antagonist who clashed with those trying to protect Amity from a returning shark nightmare. When he was 49 years old, Mascolo delivered a sharp, commanding performance that raised the film's tension, just as he often did on TV with his signature villain roles. But in real life, Mascolo faced tragedies no script could prepare him for. He went through 3 failed marriages, which created distance between him and his 2 sons. After the death of his first wife, Rose Maimone, in 1986, he lived for years in solitude, throwing himself into his work to fill the emotional void. Though he later married Patricia Schultz, old wounds still lingered quietly behind the curtain. His greatest success came as Stefano de Mera on Days of Our Lives, a role that spanned more than 3 decades and crowned him television's king of villains. Yet behind those returns to form, Mascolo was fighting a losing battle with Alzheimer's, the cruel disease that slowly erased his memory, his career, and eventually his identity. In 2015, after a major stroke, he retired from acting. "I think it's time for Stefano to disappear," he said, a farewell as quiet as it was heartbreaking. Joseph Mascolo passed away on December 8, 2016, at the age of 87. He left behind a powerful legacy and a life full of emotional fractures, with an estimated net worth of $2 million. Colin Wilcox Paxton as Dr. Elkins. Colin Wilcox Paxton was born on February 4, 1935, in Cincinnati, Ohio, and became one of the most haunting screen presences of the 1960s. When she was 43 years old, she played Dr. Elkins in Jaws 2, 1978. A small but striking role that reflected the deep emotional gravitas she had built during her career peak. From childhood, Wilcox was immersed in theater, influenced by parents who founded a community playhouse in Highlands, North Carolina. But it was her portrayal of Mayella Ewell, the woman who falsely accused Tom Robinson in To Kill a Mockingbird, 1962, that made her name unforgettable. That role, however, came with a heavy price. Audiences often confused her with the villain she portrayed. At one NAACP event, she was shunned, even though she was attending as a civil rights advocate. Her personal life was no less painful. 2 failed marriages, one broken by betrayal, the other crushed under the weight of a harsh industry, left her battling long spells of depression. Though she remained active in film and television into the early 2000s, her presence slowly faded amid waves of younger talent. In her final years, as roles dried up and close friends passed away, Wilcox retreated into a quiet home in Highlands. Though she was once invited to teach theater, she declined, saying, "I have nothing left to give." Brain cancer struck quietly, ushering in a slow and cruel end to a life spent navigating between emotional truths and fictional pain. She died in 2009 at the age of 74, leaving behind a modest net worth, mostly spent on medical care and family support. Barry Coe as Andrews. Barry Coe, born Barry Clark Heacock, on November 26, 1934, appeared in Jaws 2, 1978, as Andrews when he was 44 years old, a supporting character who left a mark amid the film's escalating tension. Once a rising Hollywood star and winner of the 1960 Golden Globe for Most Promising Newcomer, Coe's life story didn't follow the script of a happy-ending film. After his breakout role as Rodney Harrington in Peyton Place, 1957, Coe seemed destined for A-list stardom. He even shared his Golden Globe win with Troy Donahue and George Hamilton, but the spotlight didn't last. Despite roles in major films like Love Me Tender, The 300 Spartans, and later Jaws 2, Coe was frequently relegated to supporting parts. The glow of Hollywood slowly faded, and with it, so did his career momentum. Adding to his heartbreak were 2 silent divorces. According to a close friend, he was always looking for a family but never managed to keep one. The loss of loved ones during the 1970s deeply affected his emotional stability. There was a time when he even turned down film offers to live in seclusion. Though he ran a small nutritional supplement business to maintain financial stability, his lifestyle remained modest, unlike many of his contemporaries. Most of his income from the 1980s Mr. Goodwrench TV ads went toward supporting relatives and repaying personal debt, especially after a failed investment in the early 1990s. In his final years, Barry Coe lived quietly in Palm Desert, California, better known to locals as a well-dressed elderly gentleman who visited the bookstore every morning, rather than as a former film star. With no children, no remaining spouse, and suffering from myelodysplastic syndrome, he gradually withdrew from the world. He passed away on July 16, 2019, at the age of 84, leaving behind a modest cinematic legacy and a life story that gives pause to anyone who ever longed for the spotlight. Susan French as Old Lady. Susan French was born on January 23, 1912 in Los Angeles and appeared in dozens of films and TV series. When she was 66 years old, she portrayed the Old Lady in Jaws 2, 1978, a small role infused with quiet sorrow, mirroring the tone of her own life, muted, lonely, and marked by deep emotional scars. She began her journey on the Broadway stage and was an alumna of the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, a woman of dreams and ambition. Yet Hollywood never truly opened its doors to her. Despite her talent and classic beauty, she was mostly cast in background roles, often as silent, elderly women. Her career peaked late and faded quickly, leaving her with feelings of bitterness and resignation. Unable to break through into stardom, Susan faded from memory, with her final screen appearance in Fist of the North Star in 1995, followed by years of life lived quietly outside the industry spotlight. She married once, but that marriage ended early. With no children and few close relatives, Susan spent her final years alone. Prolonged solitude led to depression, and aging came with financial hardships. Although she had appeared in well-known films like Somewhere in Time and Flatliners, Susan was never paid what she truly deserved. In old age, she relied on a modest pension and reportedly had to sell personal belongings to cover medical costs. Her net worth at the time of her death was minimal, barely enough to pay her final bills. Susan French passed away on April 6, 2003, at the age of 91, after a long battle with depression and deteriorating health. She died in silence. No grand funeral, no public farewell. Her ashes were returned to family, marking the end of a life devoted to art, but forever sidelined by the industry's brutal hierarchy. A lifetime of playing supporting roles both on and off the screen, Susan French was a heartbreaking reminder of show business's cold reality. Not all talent is remembered. The journeys of the stars of Jaws and Jaws 2 are stories of talent, tragedy, and lasting legacy in the hearts of fans. Which character did you love the most? What memory of the film has stayed with you all these years? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's pay tribute to the legends who helped shape this masterpiece.